Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hardworking Americans and their families? You will. This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefit in benefit plan. Now prepare to learn, plan, save, and protect with the FIA Group.
Well, hello there. You are listening to yet another Empowering Plans with the FIA Group podcast. I am Ron Peck, Executive Vice President and General Counsel with the FIA Group. And, today, if you're not aware, we're recording this on November 6th, the 6th of November. It's Friday. It's been a couple days since Election Day. And, you would think that we're going to be really sort of focusing our discussion today on the presidential election and, who the president is and where we see things going from a healthcare perspective. But if you're like us, you're watching the news and you're waiting for confirmation regarding who or whom the president is going to be. You've got different people with different feelings on the matter. I think the majority believe that former Vice President Joe Biden will be the next president. But, again, like he says, it's not over till it's over. But that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of things to talk about. We have local elections. We have the state and federal level, Congress, right? The House, the Senate. So there's a lot going on that we need to talk about besides the glaring, obvious presidential election. And you know what I'm going to say next. You know that we can't talk politics without the one and only Brady Bizzarro. Hey, Brady, how you doing?
Hello, Brady.
I try to avoid it, but you are like a dog. The bell rings and you salivate. But listen, Brady, it's a little scary when it's just you and I, right? We can just go on forever. So somebody has to come in and sort of provide those guidelines, those parameters, right? They have to put up the barriers, the guardrails, and keep us on track. And who better to do so, I say, than me? No, I'm just kidding. Listen, we've got somebody else with us, Nick Bonds. Nick, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, y'all. Yeah, that's me. I'll do what I can to keep you guys on task here.
Yeah, right. Good luck. Listen, you're not going to be able to physically hold us down because we're calling in from satellite locations. So as a result, you're just going to have to use your wit to kind of keep us in check. Listen, guys, a lot going on. You know that we're going to be doing a lot of these podcasts over the next few days and weeks and months as things start to shake out and shape up. But even right now, just knowing what we know, there's a lot to talk about. And Brady, I think you want to kind of set the agenda for today.
I do. I wanted to ground myself, Ron, which is why I said the hello, Brady thing at the beginning, because I feel like I've been awake for, it seems like 4 days straight now, because election week is not over. Like you said, we still don't have the results in the presidential race. We do have some results in the Senate and House races, but even that now is more complicated. And so I'll do my best to give some high-level figures and let everyone know where we're at. So currently, we are awaiting calls in a few significant states, including Pennsylvania, including Georgia, including Arizona, and North Carolina, and Nevada, and even Alaska. Some of these states have been counting, it feels like, for days, because it has been days. Like you said, Ron, things look to be trending in a certain direction. So I think the betting markets are saying that we expect Vice President Biden to become the president-elect sometime soon. But in terms of what's next, I think we're going to see legal challenges. We've already seen some filed by the Trump campaign in a number of states alleging that there were illegal votes cast and they didn't have meaningful access to voting sites. So this could drag out for a few weeks in terms of the final result. And who knows, maybe we might end up before the Supreme Court in some of these cases. But that's the way that things are trending. Look, I think, though, my impression of the result at that level is that we didn't see the sort of trouncing that pollsters said we would see. We didn't see a sort of blue wave. And that's probably why you could say in the Senate things are so close, because the pollsters projected that the Democrats would retake the majority in the Senate relatively easily. And now it looks like we're coming down to the state of Georgia. A few incumbent senators lost their races, which is actually a pretty big deal. So Doug Jones in Alabama lost to a Republican there. Martha McSally, a Republican, lost in Arizona to Mark Kelly, who is an astronaut, which is awesome. But it looks like the Senate's coming down to Georgia, where they have very particular laws about runoffs. And in this case, there are two races involving two senators, one of which was appointed that neither candidate got 50% in their races. And so we'll be proceeding to a runoff in January. And so if you thought politics would be over for a while, you were wrong, because there's going to be campaigns for those seats that are pretty hardly fought, because if both seats go to the Democrats, then they will control the Senate. Because remember, if Joe Biden wins the presidency, Vice President Kamala Harris would be the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. So that's a very big deal to look at and to watch. Just quickly on the House and what happened there. Again, the pollsters were predicting that the Democrats would expand their majority in the House. And what actually happened is they lost quite a few seats that they didn't think they would lose. Many of those seats were representatives who won in 2018, and those seats flipped back to Republican. But we still have 32, give or take, House seats that have not been called, that may have changed while we were just talking. So a few more outstanding. But look, the result here is divided government. And so that's sort of the high-level stats. I'll just quickly note that we expect, in terms of the calls are waiting for, Arizona and Pennsylvania are the most important states to watch at the presidential level. And we think that soon we might have calls in those states.
So, it's interesting, because I think that with the presidential election being such big news, so much of our focus as Americans and just as people has been on the presidential election. But to your point, I think what we're seeing at the Senate, in the House, you also have other states, even at the state level. Sometimes we don't really, I think, pay attention enough, but ultimately that's going to be what decides or dictates what we as health benefit plan and health insurance professionals will be spending our time looking at over the next few months and years. One of the things that I remember happened in the last year that, frankly, I think was very impactful, but was at the state level. You might recall out in the Pacific Northwest, right? You have Oregon, Washington. You've got governor talking about public options at the state level, and paying reference-based pricing and Medicare-based prices, and how if that works there, that could become sort of a model for other states. It's important to remember that states at the state level can make a lot of decisions and pass laws that are going to be impactful, not just in that state, but nationally, as other states see what they do and fall in lockstep. So, to your point, and even further, I want to make sure that people are not so distracted by the presidential election that they lose track of what's going on. Another thing that you've talked about, Brady, is the Supreme Court case regarding the ACA and its constitutionality. And what I think is fascinating is, let's say hypothetically, they do determine that it's not constitutional, and I'm not saying that they will, but let's say they did, especially in light of the recent court appointee, Supreme Court justice appointed by President Trump. Now that you have a very divided Congress, right, what does that mean for the future of health benefit and health insurance regulation at the federal level? Assuming, again, just for argument's sake, that the ACA is deemed to be unconstitutional.
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to get Nick's take on this too, but my thoughts quickly are, I think what we do know in the Senate, no matter what happens, is that either party is likely to have a slim majority. And that doesn't bode well when you're expecting big changes. And I think what that means is, if the Supreme Court does take the drastic step, as many view it to be, of striking down the entire ACA, you won't see a Senate that's able to respond quickly to that event. So you have a lot of people that lose coverage, 20 million people or so, right, who are then sort of without a paddle, and the Senate really unable to do much, because remember, the Senate did not yet abolish the filibuster for legislation. You need 60 votes to pass meaningful legislation, and you're not going to probably get that so easily. So I think there's a real danger now with a slim majority in the Senate that you would potentially see the country flailing if the entire ACA is struck down. What do you think on that one, Nick? Do you foresee a similar struggle there, or how do you think that might play out?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that it's going to be very difficult. Whoever winds up controlling the Senate, and like you said, it may come down to those two races in Georgia. Whoever winds up controlling the Senate is going to have a very difficult time trying to quickly respond to any sort of Supreme Court decision that does something so drastic as tear down the entire ACA. I can't imagine them being able to quickly respond to that, but it's going to leave a lot of people in limbo with regard to their health coverage. One thing that I know Biden had talked about was lowering the age for Medicare to, to 60 years instead of 65, something like that. If he could pull it off,
Right.
could give some people some solace. I know that there's also other mechanisms that Congress can use to move the ball slightly down the field through things like budget reconciliation. They can do small incremental things, but to fully overhaul and replace the Affordable Care Act, that would take some buy-in, regardless of who wins the Senate race in Georgia. That would require some buy-in from the Republicans across the aisle. So it's going to be a very contentious couple of months if something does come out of the Supreme Court that really shakes up the Affordable Care Act. I think that a lot of Republicans, they know that healthcare was such a big issue in the 2018 midterms, and some of the Republicans in Congress may already have their eyes on 2022 and be wondering how campaigning on healthcare is going to help or hurt them. And if the Affordable Care Act does go away, that's going to be a huge issue moving forward.
This is interesting because here we are, we're talking about, if the Supreme Court strikes down the law, it creates a vacuum, and unfortunately Congress, or fortunately, depending on your opinion, Congress is unable to really pass any meaningful legislation to fill that void because of the split. But realistically, even if the Supreme Court decides that the law is constitutional and allowed to remain, we can go right back to the conversation we talked about at the state level with public options. Recall that, if Joe Biden is elected president, that one of the things or messages upon which he campaigned was his idea of adding a public option to the law. Passing a law versus amending an existing law, it's still something that a president can't just do on their own. So I wonder, really, regardless, if the Supreme Court strikes it down, there will be a void that can't be filled, at least right now. And if the Supreme Court upholds the law, I don't really foresee anyone having the wherewithal or ability to change it much. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Ron, because the public option for many Republicans is considered, a step too far on the way to socialism and socialized medicine. So that's probably not going to happen now. I think that's why this Senate result is so important, because it's really a harbinger of what's to come for a potential Biden presidency, whether it's crippled or not. Because if Mitch McConnell, the Senate leader, is going to block him on every issue that he wants as his agenda, that's going to be a problem going forward. And so I think that's why for our industry, I think there's a little bit more predictability now. I think you're seeing that in the markets too, by the way, is why they're up. I think that cuts both ways, because there are a number of things actually that President Trump did that were popular in both parties with respect to healthcare. Remember, price transparency, right? That was one thing. And he did talk about letting Medicare negotiate drug prices. So I'm not even so sure those things happen now, because the truth is many in the Republican Party didn't agree with the president when he wanted to make those kinds of reforms. Those were his kind of populist streak reforms that he talked about. And so I worry that while there may be some predictability in terms of the ACA staying in place, assuming it's kept in place by the Supreme Court, I was reading an article today where a CEO of a major hospital chain said, we love this result because it means our industry does pretty well when things don't change. And so on the other side of the spectrum, that's, I think, a problem for people, the payers, who are looking for transparency and other things. And one last point I'll make is that, look, President Trump also was known for exceeding oftentimes his executive authority by passing these executive orders and trying to make reforms. The court sort of slapped him back on many occasions there. So I think if people are expecting Joe Biden to try and a similar thing to get around the Senate, I think he'll see similar problems. So I don't expect there to be tremendous change that's forced through executive authority and executive actions. I think the Biden administration would know that that's probably not likely to succeed. So I kind of think we're frozen in place. That's my take on things.
Exciting. So assuming at the federal level that there's really not much, regardless of what the Supreme Court decides, obviously, if they cast out the ACA, does that mean we're going back to where we were before, and what's that going to look like? And if they don't, it's just cruise control, stay where we are. What else should we be looking at? What other things should we keep our eye on, sort of as the closing statement, guys?
I think there were a lot of interesting things at the state level that we probably ought to take a look at. There were a number of states that had very interesting health-related ballot measures. There were a number of ballot measures in California, which every election, California has a ton of ballot measures, but they had a few ballot measures about things like stem cell research and regulations on dialysis companies, and they imposed a few new limitations. And there was a ballot measure that was backed by Uber and Lyft to try to make sure that their employees stayed independent contractors and not actual employees. Things like that could have ripple effects through the other states and how they look at their regulations and how they look at how employees and independent contractors are being treated in the gig economy. There were also a lot of new drug measures on state ballots this past week. I know Oregon decriminalized a shocking number of fairly intense drugs. Yeah. Marijuana was on the ballot in a lot of areas. So there are things like that are small incremental changes, but they could have impacts employee health plans all over the country for sure.
Nick, to your point, my sort of parting thoughts on state action, Ron, like Nick said, a lot of surprising ballot initiatives. This election is going to be hard to understand because I looked at some of the Fox News exit polling, and what that showed is that a majority of people in this country actually wanted government involvement in healthcare, believe it or not. So that doesn't seem to square so well with, what we've been hearing. So I think, and a lot of minimum wage laws passed. So I think there's a shift potentially in the country a bit more left, even though people may not actually realize that's what's going on. But I think there is, because at the end of the day, as we know, the system in terms of prices, right, is severely broken. And so I think it's going to be incumbent upon states now, it looks like, to try and remedy this problem one by one. Because if we don't fix this problem, and I've been saying this for years, if we don't fix this problem, inevitably the government is going to step in and do so because people are going to just call for it. And so I was very interested to see that in the exit polling. I think it's a reason for some concern, despite the fact that we may be frozen in place. There are things happening behind the scenes, I think, in the sort of collective awareness of people in the country. And it's incumbent on us to, I think, try and fix the system so that we can show that employer-sponsored insurance is the way to go for the future. And one last thing, Ron, I would be doing myself a disservice if I didn't point out that my prediction for the election was actually correct. So I can't wait to tell Adam that on the webinar we have.
You know what? I can't wait either. And if that's not a reason to tune in, folks, I don't know what is. So listen, great talk. Obviously not the end. We'll keep this going. But in the meantime, thank you to everybody. Nick, Brady, Dylan, who's sitting in for Pat today in the producer's booth. Can't forget you, buddy. Appreciate your hard work. And of course, I humbly accept your gratitude as well. On behalf of everyone at the FIA Group and in our industry, thank you again for joining us in Empowering Plans with the FIA Group. Have a good one and be well.